Today's topic is oil and gas reserves evaluation using PHDWin software. So let's get right into it. The topics we're going to cover are listed here, and there's a lot to go through. And at the end, if we have time, we'll do some questions. So let's get into the steps to create a database and do a reserves evaluation. All right, what is reserves evaluation? Most people think, well, that's where you estimate the volumes of oil and gas reserves. And that's the first part. And if we have producing wells, we can use decline curve analysis. That's real common. Most times we have producing wells. But we can also, do volumetric calculations, material balance, analogy. So there's several ways to do reserve estimates. And we can use all these and use PHDWin to help evaluate it. All right, the second part is we want to evaluate the value of the reserves. It's more than just counting barrels. And the way we evaluate values is we use the future cash flow method. And that's called economics. And PHDWin is the software tool that helps us do this. And in particular, we use a discounted cash flow method. And we call that net present value or present worth. PW, that's the terminology PHDWin uses. But we can discount these cash flows in the software at various discount rates. 10% is the standard for reserve reports. But there's other ways of estimating the value of reserves. In some areas, from prior sales, we can determine that oil is worth $20 per barrel in the ground. So we can come up with a value that way. Or sometimes we have metrics for flowing barrels. So in one area, you may be paying $30,000 per flowing barrel. So if you know how much your wells are producing, you can come up with a value of those reserves. And sometimes you can just assign, dollars per acre based on nearby property sales. So there's many ways to do it, but we're going to talk about how you value reserves using economics and discounted cash flow. The first part we have to understand is production data, because most of the time we have producing wells as part of our evaluation. So we have to understand what data we're going to need. And we want to have monthly oil, gas volumes, sometime water, that we can use to evaluate. You can have daily data, but I don't recommend using daily data for decline curve analysis because it can be too optimistic in some cases. You also can have test data that's periodic flow tests on wells that you can use to help understand what's going on with the well. You can have lease production, where if you have multiple wells on one lease, sometimes the production is reported for the whole lease. And you can have allocated versus unallocated lease production. So if you have 10 wells on a lease, you can try to allocate what each well produced that each month. And sometimes we try to do that. And some of the commercial sources of production data, they will do that. Based on test data, they'll try to allocate production to each well on a lease if that's how it's reported. You also have to be aware of days on production during the month, because some states require the operators to report how many days the well was producing during the month. And when you're graphing up production data in PHDWin, it takes the monthly data and divides by the days on production to get the barrels per day. So you just have to be aware that that's how it's going to do it. Sometimes we have estimated water, or we try to estimate water. That can be helpful. And where do we get all the production data? Well, I like to use the public data when I'm doing a reserve evaluation. And that can be obtained from the state websites like the Railroad Commission or the Louisiana Department of Conservation. Sometimes you have a client or operator that will provide the production data, but I always like to compare the data that the client provides to the public data, because that's the official data that they're reporting and paying royalties on. You can also use commercial sources to acquire production data, such as Drilling Info or IHS Energy. Those are the two big ones. I use Drilling Info for my commercial production data. All right, the first step in PHDWin is to create a database and set it up with some parameters. So you can create a new database, or you can copy an existing database in PHDWin, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Then you have to create cases. You have to populate the database with cases, and cases are just a well or a lease. And it could be a producing well or a drilling proposed well or a recompletion case. So you have to create cases in PHDWin. And you can also load production data into PHDWin from the commercial sources, because you can bulk download it and then load it in fast. So it really works good using the commercial production data to create cases. Some of the things you have to watch are the as of date and discount rates. And I'm going to go over sort orders, filters, ID codes, and graph titles in this presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and open PHDWin. Here's the PHDWin program, and we're gonna create a new database. So we're gonna go File, New, and we're gonna give it a title. So we're gonna call it Pay It Forward Training, and we have to tell a location, navigate a location where we want to save the data. And we have to give it a file name, so we can call it work. And we also, at this time, we can associate the new database with a model file. And a model file is a file that has the price. Mainly, we use it for price schedules. And you can create a new one or copy one, but you have to, or the program will create a default one. But I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the model file that I already have set up for this presentation, because we have that data, we have that ready. So we have a model file. So we'll just go ahead and use that for the new database, but you can do it later or create your own. All right, so once you get the basic information, you have to press save. And a new database is going to get created. All right. First thing we want to do is check some of the project properties. Let's go into here, File, Project Properties. And we have the name and everything that we just set up. But we have to, first thing to check is the economics and the as of date. So the default date came for this month, but this is a year-end reserve report. We're going to change it to 1/1/2020. So you have to know your as of date of your evaluation. Then you have to look at the discounting rate. This one in blue is going to be the primary discount rate, and most of the time we use 10%. But we can generate a range of discount rates that are listed here. So you can change them if you want, but these are pretty good default values. And the reserve classes, pretty typical. You can change these if you want, but it's proved probable and possible classes and reserve categories here. But we're going to just keep the default values for now. All right, so what I like to do is I like to press the case list button here up in the upper left, and that brings up a window that shows me all the cases or wells. Well, you can see we have nothing, so we're going to have to start creating. Let's create a new case. So to create a new case, we can use this button here. Okay, a menu pops up. We want a single case, standard case, and let's give it a name. So we're going to call this one the Mire number one well. It's an oil well, and it's in St. Mary Parish, Louisiana. And we can put other information if you know it. Then you press next, and we're going to use the default values for ownership and economic scenario. So we'll go ahead and press next, and then it asks you for what do you want to call this case? Is it proved producing? And that's the case, is it proved producing. So you can also tie it to some case profiles. We're not going to do that right now. So we're just going to create a blank case by pressing finished. All right, so there's our case, Mire number 1. Next thing I like to do is I like to do editor cases, and that brings up the case editor menu. And I like to have 3 windows when I'm doing my analysis. Third one is the graph. So you go graphs, display. So now I have 3 windows. I have my graph, my list of wells, and the case editor down at the bottom. Another thing I like to do is I like to put titles on my graphs. So it just gives it a lot of information that you can easily see. So you just go to the graph window, and you press graphs, titles, and you say show titles. And you can go ahead and set up the titles like you want. These are the ones I like. If you put this checkbox, it puts the word operator, then the operator name next to it. If you turn that off, it just shows the operator name. So what we want to do is I want to have the field name over here, and then I want to have the use these windows here to pick up like a lot of data that you can put on the graph title. So I want to have the reservoir of this well here. And I can have the county, state, and then the value. So let's go ahead and put some marks there. Okay. Now then you can do the bottom titles. And right here we have the cum of the major product, the reserves of the major project, and the EUR. And then we have the minor product on the side. So we have an oil well, so the major product is oil. So we press OK. And now it's going to put some titles. If we have an operator, we're going to call this Exxon. And so if we save that, it should show up here on the graph. Okay, so now we have a blank well with some information about it, but we have no production data. So over here, I have some data for a well. So you can use Excel data for the Mire number 1. So I have 12 months of production data that I can import into PHDWin. So we have 12 months of data. So we're going to go to the monthly history tab, and we can see there's nothing in here. So we have to have a start date for the production. We know that we have 12 months starting in January. So I'm just going to put 01-01-2019. When you say OK, it's going to populate zeros from the starting date until the as of date. So it gives you 12 months of zeros. So we go back to the gas, oil, and water and the well count data. So we go ahead and copy that. And then we want to paste it into Excel. So you go to the first month that you're going to be pasting, and you just press Paste Excel. All right. So that now we have some production data on the graph. So let's double click and change some of the year scales. This is a semi-log rate versus time graph, common for doing reserve projections and decline curve analysis. All right, so there's our production data. We have oil, gas, and water in barrels per day, MCF per day. And then the years at the bottom. All right, but also, if we have some test data, we can go ahead and put that in using this tab right here, production test. Now, there is a way to import it in with Excel. You have to have it all in the right format and everything. But I don't generally do that. But I just generally press insert and type in manually the data that I have. I have some tests. So you can put the date. I have a flowing tubing pressure of 500. I have a gas test of 300 and 400 barrels of oil and 1 barrel of water. So you say, okay. So you have the test data. And you can display different things. If you want the flow and pressure in there, you just drag it in. Okay, so now I want to add another test. I got another one on June 1st. So I'm going to type that in. I have the only pressure data I have is the flowing pressure. That you can put in other information if you have it. I don't have it. I have a gas rate, oil rate, and water. So you say, okay. So now I have two tests. I want to have one more I want to put in. I have date first, and then the flowing pressure, and the gas, and the oil, and then the water. Okay, so now I have some test data in there. And so I want to see the test data on the graph. So I have to double click on the graph and go to products. So on the left margin here, I have oil, gas, and water. If I don't want to plot water, I can just say none, and that takes it off, or I can put water back. All right, but on the right margin, I got a room for 3 more items I can plot. So let's go ahead and scroll down and let's put test oil and test gas, and then we're going to put flow and tubing pressure. So let's press OK. So now we get the test data on the graph. We can move them down or up by pulling the numbers. Let's pull that down. So let's pull the oil down a little bit, but we have to move the test data down to make it match. So you can see the oil tests are somewhat similar to the monthly average production. The monthly production is the solid line, and the test points are the little dots. Okay, so that's how you created a case by hand. But that takes a long time. So like I said, I like to bring in drilling info data. So to bring in drilling info data, you go to File, Import Data, or Create New Cases, and you have to check Import. All right, so now it's going to say, what do you want to import? So you have to navigate to where you're saving the data, and we have some data from Fayette County, Eagle Ford well. So let's go ahead and find that file, and then let's say Open, and you can change the default working interest and ownership, but we're going to do that later. So let's just say Next. And PHDWin, when you import data, it assumes that you're trying to update wells you already have, or update the production. So it's trying to match the new data with the old data, and you can override or whatever. But we're not doing that. We're bringing in new cases. So we're going to turn that button off, and we don't have to worry about none of these. Okay, because we're bringing in new data. So press OK. And it's going to say, okay, I don't have this well or lease in my database. Do you want me to create it? And you just say yes to all. So now we've imported 102 cases. So here's our list of wells. Now we have some wells. And we can see right here it's 103. Because we have the Mire #1 that we created by hand, and then the wells that came in from the Fayette County, Eagle Ford. But we have some other data from Gonzales County. We want to bring that in also. So let's go ahead and do that again. File, Import Data, or Create New Cases, and navigate over here to the Gonzales Eagle Ford well. So let's bring those in. We can use the default values here. Press Next. And again, we don't need the match. We're bringing in new wells, so turn that off. And it's going to say, okay, what do you want to do? You want to create new cases? I'm going to say yes. All right, so we have 393 cases that we just brought in. So we press OK. And now the total right here on the case list is 496. All right, so now we got a lot of data. We got some data we can look at. All right. So how do we want to see this data? Let's organize it a little bit by using these A to Z button, which is a sort order, or here's the sort order. Here, okay. So you can say, I want to make a new sort order. All right. Or you can just type this button. All right, so we're going to make a new sort order. Let's just call it working. And you can pick things along here that you want to put in your sort order. So, for instance, general information, I want the operator. So I'm going to put the operator right there, and then the reservoir. And I always like to look at the production data. When does it start? When does it end? So I can put beginning production date. Another thing I like to do is I like to put the historical gas production and the historical oil production, because that allows me to easily see if any of the wells have no production. Sometimes you get wells with zero production. It's a new completion or something, and you want to delete those because those aren't interesting for the project. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the oil historic. We're going to put that to the top so we can see it. And you can scroll easily so you can see this well. It's not picking up the cum yet for some reason, I guess. But this frost, this has no production or 1 month of water. So we really don't want that well. So we're just going to drag it into the garbage can because it's not valid. It's not good for what we're doing. We don't need it. Okay, but all the other wells have some cumulative. Okay, so that's our sort order. Let's go ahead and put the operator back. You can save these as names if you want. Working number 2 and reservoir. So you save that. Okay, so now we have a working and a working 2 sort order. You can make as many as you want. All right, so here's the operator. We're sorting by operator, but what we want to do is we want to put a check mark by operator and 2 check marks to sum it. You can group it and sum it. You press save. Now it tells you, it shows you each operator and how many wells they have. This operator has 6 wells. This one has 5. This one has 77. So you can look through the data. It looks like they're all Eagleford wells, Eagleford, reservoir name. Okay, so that's how you use sort orders to organize your data. Now there's another function called a filter over here to the right. And you can touch that pull down menu, or you can hit this little funnel. It'll bring up a new sort order. a new filter. So say our client is Marathon Oil. So Marathon Oil has 15 wells. So we only want to evaluate the Marathon wells. The other wells we might be using for type curves or just analogy to check, but the client is Marathon, so we want to evaluate their wells. So we're going to put a filter we're going to add a new filter, and we're going to call it Marathon wells. And so what you do is you come over here to general information and you scroll down to operator. And you can put all kind of contains or does not contain, but we want to put contains Marathon, M-A-R-A. And you can do other like you can say if it's Marathon and this field, but we're just doing a simple filter. So okay, you press save. Now you only have 15 wells. So if we're going to be doing work now, it's easy. We can just work on these wells. We don't have all those 400 other wells in the way. And we're ready to work. Okay, so another thing you can do is you can use ID codes to help organize your data. So here's the ID code tab, and several default ID codes are populated when you bring in IHS Energy data. Like the API formatted API number, PHDWin number, that every case gets a number in PHDWin. You have a retrieval code, that might be from drilling info. And sometimes they have a serial number from the state as an alternate ID. Okay, so these are the ID codes, but you can add it. You can add as many as you want. So I'm going to go ahead and add another by pressing insert. I'm going to add another ID code. So I'm just going to call it evaluate, because this is I want to put some ID code on the wells I want to evaluate. So now every well has an evaluate with a blank on it. So for instance, if you're going to evaluate Marathon's wells, but they call you and say, oh, we just sold the 36H, so don't evaluate that one. So we want to get it out of the evaluation. So the way to do that is you do an editor, and you're going to watch what I'm going to do. It's real neat. So you can go to editor, global editor. And then another window pops up with your cases. You have 15 cases, but you can choose any wells you want by just dragging them in, and dragging them in. But what we're going to do is we can say, okay, we want Marathon's wells. We want to drag them in like that. But they sold the 6H, so we don't, or the 36H, so we don't want that one. So we're going to get rid of that one. And now we're going to put a evaluate code on these wells. So you just go to miscellaneous data over to the left and you scroll all the way. There's a lot of things you can edit. But anyway, you go all the way to the bottom and it says set ID code. So you go ahead down here and you pick the evaluate one that you just created and you put a yes or Y. So now it put that Y on all the wells you want to evaluate. So if you go to evaluate, see we have 15 cases, but if you add a new evaluation filter, just go here and you say I want any wells that have evaluate equal to Y. So when you save that, now it's going to go down to 14 wells because the number 36 is taken out. So the filtering and sorting are real helpful when you're trying to organize and evaluate your data. So that's how you do that. Okay, so we've created a database. We've populated it a little bit with some producing cases. We don't have drilling cases yet, or it's all producing cases. So let's go back to the presentation. All right, so we've done that. We've loaded data in. We could have set the max economic rate. I forgot to show you that, but it was set to 50 years, which is good. All right. The next thing we have to do is we have to have well ownership on all the reserve cases. So you have to know what your client owns. If the client only owns 50% of the wells, that's what you want to evaluate, not 100%. So producing, shut in, future drilling, all have to have ownership. And the three things you have to understand, and terms that are used in PHDWin, are working interest, revenue interest, and lease net revenue interest. So working interest is the share of the well that you're going to pay for the expenses, drilling and operating. The revenue interest is the share of the well that you're going to get the revenue on. And then the lease net revenue interest is what's left over, what revenue is left over after landowner royalties and overrides are paid. So you have to understand those three terms. So let's look at them a little bit more. All right, so most of the time, your net revenue interest is just equal to the revenue interest divided by the working interest. So here's an example. You got 60% working interest and your revenue interest is 45. So you just divide those two here in the example, and now your net revenue for this lease is 0.75 or 75%. Or if you know the working interest and the net revenue interest of the lease, say you know that the lease has a 20% royalty. So the net revenue is 80. Or in this case, it was a 25% royalty, and so the net revenue is 75. So you just take the working interest of 60 times the net revenue on the lease of that, and you get 0.45 is your raw revenue interest for this well. Okay, so where do we get ownership data? Well, you have to, most of the time you get it from the owner or the operator of the well or your client. But sometimes if you're not working for the operator, or you might be working for a mineral owner, you have to go look at check stubs from the mineral owners to see if you can determine the ownership on each well. So some mineral owners just get a check each month from the operator, and it has all the data about what they're selling and what share they own, so you can look at those. Sometimes you can get lease operating statements and determine the working interest from there. But you have to have ownership data. And in general, engineers don't go to the courthouse and search lease records to determine, who owns what share of the lease. That's kind of out of the purview of an engineer doing a reserve evaluation. All right, so let's just go a quick example of how ownership is divided up on a well. So everything I'm going to show you is based on participation based on surface area, lease surface area. So like if I have 40 acres and you have 40 acres, we each going to get 50% of the wells. That kind of makes sense, right? So it's just proportional. Everything I'm going to show you is based on that. But just what if the reservoir is 3 times thicker on my 40 acres than under your 40 acres? So is it really fair to go 50-50? But in special cases, you can you can change the ownership based on thickness of the reservoir, but most of the time it's just based on surface area. So let's look at how that works. All right, here's a map of some leases. So we have 2 sections of land. Section 1 right here is 640 acres. Section 2 is 640 acres. And we have different landowners that own these different tracts of land. And in the red, the green is a proposed horizontal well, and the red box is the drilling unit that the state has established. So this is a unit that says this green well is going to drain this 640 red box. And the state establishes that. So, okay, the Smith family owns 320 acres, all this left half of the section. The Alvarez family owns this half. But the Smith family has leased their mineral rights to BP for 1/8 royalty, and the Alvarez family has leased to Exxon for 3/16 royalty. Then over here you have the Adams family and the Mire family that own quarter sections of the land, but they've leased it to another oil company, but they're outside of the unit, so they're really not going to be involved with this well. The Lopez family owns this 280 acres here, and they've leased it to the operator TDC Oil for 1/8 royalty. TDC is the oil, and Lopez 1H is the name of the proposed well. But the Jones family, they own this little small 40 acres. They've also leased it to TDC, but they negotiated a better deal. They got 3/16 royalty on their land. All right, so let's look at the mineral owners, landowners. Okay, so we have all the family names here, Smith through Mire, and how many acres of land they own. So like the Smith owns 320 acres, but only half of it is in the unit, the southern half. The unit is 640 acres. So if you want to know what share of the unit the Smith family have, you divide 160 by 640, and you get 0.25. So they own 25% of the unit. Their royalty rate that they lease to BP is 0.125, because a 1/8 royalty is just 0.125 as a fraction. So you take their share of the unit, 0.25 times their royalty rate, and you get 0.03 revenue interest. So that means the Smith family is going to get 3% of the revenue from the well. The Alvarez and Lopez and Jones, you can do the similar calculation based on their surface area in the unit. The Adams and Mire family own some acreage, but it's 0 acres in the unit, so they don't get anything, so they're not involved. Okay, so all the shares add up to 1.0. It always has to add up to 1. All right, let's go to the working interest partners. Over here you have the oil companies. TDC Oil, BP, Exxon, and XYZ is that other company. So TDC Oil leased 280 acres from the Lopez family and 40 acres from the Jones family. So what you have to do is you take the area of the lease, 280, divided by the total, 640, and they have their working interest share on this lease would be 0.43. The lease net revenue, because they got a 1/8 royalty, is 0.875. So you multiply 0.43 times 0.87 and you get 0.38. That's going to be the revenue interest on this lease. On the other 40 acres, they have a different calculation, a little bit different. So the total is TDC Oil is going to have half the acreage, and they're going to have half the working interest. And the revenue interest is 0.433. So you have to add these up. BP has a lease of 160 acres in the unit. So 160 divided by 640 is 0.25. So that's their working interest. They have the net revenue on the lease because they gave a 1/8 royalty. So they get 0.2188 of the revenue of the well. Exxon's the same. XYZ Oil Company leased the property to the north. They get nothing because they're not in the well. So let's summarize how that works. So we have all the entities that are involved with the well, the families and the oil companies. You have working interest right here, and the revenue interest. So the families, they don't pay for the well, so they have 0 working interest. But TDC Oil pays for half, and BP and Exxon pay for the other half of the well. So that adds up to 1. But the families get their royalties in a form of a revenue interest. Here's their share of the well, and then the oil company share. And that's always adds up to 1. So that's how you do it. That's just a simple example of surface area participation and how you divide up the ownership of a well or unit. Okay, let's go ahead into PHDWin and show you how you add ownership to wells. All right, so we have our marathon wells. Here's our PHDWin file. And we have a button, a tab right here called ownership. And again, remember we have the working interest, revenue interest, and lease net revenue for the well. And it just has the default values in there right now. So if you want to change it, you double click. All right, so if Marathon only owns, so like when I showed you the example of TDC Oil, they only own 50%. So you would, if your client is TDC Oil, you would put their ownership in this here, in this box. And you can calculate the revenue interest based on the lease. Remember the lease was a 0.875. So you just, and it'll calculate the other one. So that's how you press save, and now you have the ownership for this well. And you can do a global editor if you want. Let's show you how you do a global editor. So you editor global, and you have your wells that you want to evaluate listed here. So you just go to ownership, and you say initial working interest is 0.5. The initial case, the net revenue is 0.875. Remember that. And so you want to calculate, auto calculate the third variable, and it's going to be the revenue interest. So you press apply, and it's going to calculate all that for you. All right, so now all the wells have the correct ownership. And if you want to check it, you can put that in the sort order. You can come in here and just say, show me the working interest of my wells and the revenue interest, just so I can check. So now that, look, you can see that they're all changed. Another thing you can do if you want to, you can edit them in Excel. So let me show you how that works. You go editor, edit data in Excel. You select your wells. We have 14 wells selected. If you want different wells, you can just grab them here and just drag them in. If you know those wells have a different ownership, and you pick ownership and you say edit. All right, so up pops all the wells, and they have the ownership here. So if you have a spreadsheet that has the correct ownership, you can just paste it in here, or you can just type it in by hand. All right, so you can change or type it in or paste in values. So you close this spreadsheet by Xing out, and it's going to ask you, do you want to bring in that new data? So you say yes. It's going to bring in any changes that you made. Okay, so that's how we build a database and get some wells in it and get some ownership data in. So let's take a break on that right now.